Hello and welcome to this Vicon training video. This video will focus on the history and chart systems in Niagara AX 3.6 build. The first enhancement that we'll talk about is the fact that in 3.6 build we can assign display names to histories. To demonstrate this, I'll navigate in the station in the nav tree to the history space and then locate a specific history within the tree. In this case, it's outside air temperature log. When I right-click the history in the tree, you'll notice that in the dialog box there's an option to set display name. When I click the set display name option, it opens a dialog box which allows me to type in the new display name that I want to use. In this case, I'll make the display name Richmond space OA temp so that we can provide more clarification about which outside air temperature reading this might be coming from. When I go to the slot sheet view for that history, you'll notice that there's a history display name slot. So the name is history display name, similar to display name that's used for normal component names, and it's a Baja format type and it's a hidden slot. So just to take a little closer look at this, I'll go ahead and choose the config flags option for the history display name slot, and I can clear the hidden flags checkbox, which will allow us to view that slot on the property sheet. So now you can see that it's a B format field editor and that the value is Richmond OA temp. So I could change this value to something like Charleston and then hit save. Now notice when I'm making changes in the property sheet, I may have to refresh the tree node over here to get it to show up the change, and there it is, Charleston OA temp. So we could also go to the slot sheet and delete this history display name slot. So if I have assigned a display name and I no longer want to use that, I can delete that and then refresh the tree node again, and now it reverts back to its original name, OA temp. And note that these display names will flow up through the framework. So if this is a JSON and we import this history to the web supervisor, then those display names will flow up because they're just slots on the property of the history extension configuration. So the primary reason for this display names on histories is that there are a limited number of characters that can be used to name a history, and we had customers that wanted to use longer names or more meaningful names with a lot longer characters than we wanted to support in the name, so the display name allows you to do that. The next feature I'd like to talk about is the ad hoc reporting feature that's been improved for being able to export charts. So when we build a chart using the history chart builder, I'll grab a couple of data points here. Then we wanted to export that ad hoc report that we generated. We had to click the save icon in Workbench, which brought up a dialog that allowed us to save this chart as a PX file. And then once we saved it as a PX file, we would have the ability to export that PX view to a PDF file. Well, with 3.6 build, the chart building functionality has been enhanced so that once I have this ad hoc chart built, I can simply click the export icon in the Workbench menu bar, and I have the option to export the history chart to PDF. You can also access that exporter by going to the File menu in Workbench and selecting the Export option in the File menu, which invokes the same dialog. Additionally, from the chart itself, when you perform a right mouse click, you have options to export the data or export the view. When I export the view, again, that allows me to export this history chart to PDF as a PX view, meaning it's going to render this chart as it is with the traces and the XY axes and the legends and things like that. When we export the data, that gives us an option to simply export the data from the chart out to a table in PDF format or HTML or CSV, etc. So this is a nice feature, especially considering that a lot of end customers don't use Workbench, they instead use a browser, and without having a default Workbench profile, the save icon in the menu bar of the Workbench was not available either. So this will allow customers in a browser interface with a basic WB profile, for example, to easily export ad hoc reports from the chart builder to PDF or other file formats without having to save the chart and then go open it. The other thing I'd like to point out relative to this chart is that all of these temperatures are using a common axis here, and you can see all of them on the left hand side. Now prior to 3.6 there certainly were issues with consolidating histories to the same axis, and particularly when we were looking at things like set points where, for example, the cooling set point and the heating set point might have different min and max values because you're trying to enforce limits on users being able to change those set points, and those would be different than any min and max values that might be on the zone temperature proxy point that you're reading from the device, and that would lead to separate scales being used for each of those 3 points because the cooling set point and the heating set point had different min and max values than the zone temperature. So beginning with 3.6 build, the comparison for that chart axis determination really just looks at the units and at the precision. So as long as the points all have the same unit, in this case degrees Fahrenheit, and they all have the same precision, in this case 1, then they should all share a common axis on the chart. We can rebuild the chart and then see again. So they are all sharing a common axis. Now if they had different precision or different units, then they would use different axes than for the chart legend. And the last feature that I'd like to talk about has to do with setting the log trace levels on the SPI of the station. So if we right click on the station and select SPI in the nav tree, then there's a hyperlink for the log setup. When we click on the log setup, this shows each of the different logs that are associated with the station based on the drivers that are configured and the protocols and different things that are in the station. And there's columns that indicate the level of debug that gets sent to the application director. Trace meaning the lowest level, the most detailed. Message is the default and typical setting. Warning and error are higher levels, meaning that we're going to suppress some of the message level values and things in the application director as well, and only display warnings or errors, or we could even churn a particular log to none where no debug information would be sent to the application director. So if I wanted to set the email log to a trace level, perhaps because I needed to do some troubleshooting as to why I can't send and receive emails, then I would click that trace link in that email row and it would set the log level to trace. Now previously, when I wanted to save this to file, which is necessary so that when the station restarts it's saving these settings to the log.properties file, when I click the save to file link, it would take me to an interim page, and then there would be a link to go back to the previous page, to this log setup page. So now you notice that it just tells me that it saved the log properties file, and it updates the timestamp of when it was saved. So it's saving me a link, a click, and some time basically going back to the setup page, particularly if I'm trying to set up multiple log traces. So each time you clicked one of these, it would take you to that interim page for an option to save that and then return back to the log setting. So a little bit of a time saver. The other thing is that the headers of these columns are now hyperlinks as well. So let's say I had set multiple things to this trace level, for example, and then I was done with my troubleshooting and I wanted to restore everything to the message level. I can simply click the column header for message, and that's going to set all these logs over. Every log that's in the station will be set over to that level of debug. So I could click the warning column, for example, everything moves to the warning level, or I can click the message and everything moves back to the message level. Then I can save to file again to make sure all my log configurations are set to message level. So that concludes the overview of the enhancements to the history and charting system. Please stay tuned to other training videos that will cover other features in the 3.6 build. Thank you.